Hello everyone and welcome to another video and welcome to something we haven't done here on the channel in quite a while, a Q&A session. So I put out the opportunity for people to ask questions across all of my socials this morning, and Ed, behind the camera, has been sitting there with a menacing grin behind his laptop all afternoon as he has pulled together a fair amount of his favourite ones. So I'm going to be answering them blind for your viewing pleasure, which yes, does indeed run the risk of me cancelling myself here on my very own channel, but at the end of the day, we're here for a good time, not necessarily a long time. So a variety of questions across a variety of things coming at you right now.
What's your training schedule looking like at the moment?
I'm always hydrated, that's for sure. So at the moment, Mondays are heavy lower, and that is predominantly deadlift and assistance work focused, not too high volume, just very much sort of holding pattern as I hold on to my deadlift strength whilst simultaneously building my mile performance. So I'm alternating week to week on doing my track work on a Monday evening or separating it into the Tuesday evening so I'm a bit more fresh. Wednesday, upper body training. Thursday, sub-threshold / tempo running. Friday is assistance work for my deadlift and just full body, basically. Saturday, easy zone 2 run with some technical track work or strides or 100 meters on the road to contend with. Sunday, rest. So the emphasis at the moment is lower volume, higher intensity, quality of execution focused, and it's hurting me. Intensity is not something I tolerate all that well, and volume apparently is. So would I rather do 30 hours of training a week or 6 hours of focused intensity? I'm not quite sure at this point, to be honest.
How often do you miss a training session, and do you feel bad when you do?
So, recently, less so, because obviously I'm doing about 6 hours of focused intensity, so plus some pump work. So I'd say my total volume at the moment is about 8 hours a week, and compare that to this time last year where I was doing 28 to 32 hours a week of training at peak, which is wild to think about. But last year I had to be really quite good at auto-regulating when it was the right time to miss a session and when it was just me sort of not wanting to do it or being worried about the inconvenience of getting to the pool or something. So the way I view things is I'm very honest with myself about why I'm considering missing a training session. If it's because I've got comfortable at home and just can't really be arsed, then I'll make myself do it. But if I do generally feel like systemic fatigue is on the rise, that I'd actually be better getting the sleep, I'd actually be better maybe eating a little bit more that day, or there's some pressing work demands, then I will miss a session occasionally. Again, I can't give you specific numbers, but it happens not infrequently. It probably 1 or 2 sessions a month on average over the course of the past 5 years of training, but there is always a reason for me to have missed that, whether that's fatigue or practicality related. With all the things going on with the business, I'll probably end up, I'm sure, at some point talk about that, so maybe I'll save context for that, I guess. I don't know.
How did you and Johnny meet? And for those that don't know who he is, give a bit of context on him.
So we actually met in a prison cell. No, I'm just kidding. We met outside a Greg's in Slateford in Edinburgh. And for those that are wondering, I should have started with the context, I think. Johnny is my personal coach of 5 years at this point. 5 years yesterday, actually, I had come up on my Facebook memories. And he is my business partner of 2.5 years with Omnia Performance. And at this point, given how much time we spent together, I'd say probably a pretty good mate of mine as well. But he's also a massive prick. Don't hurt me, Johnny, please. Please. So we met outside of Greg's, which is about as much of a love story as any Scottish meet cute could possibly be. Andy, who owns Lift Gym in Edinburgh, has Odie, my dog's brother. We got them at the same time from the same litter. Andy's a very good friend of mine. I approached Andy with what I was training for my first Movember event and asked him who is the person that you would recommend training me for this, and his recommendation was Johnny. So I was attempting to squat 500,000 kilos in 24 hours to represent the 500,000 deaths by suicide in men every single year, and that's how Johnny and I met. We met in a Greg's car park. We got on like a house on fire. Johnny put aside his disdain for my English accent, having grown up in Scotland, pretty sharpish, and ever since then he hasn't been able to get rid of me. So more fool him for letting me in.
Why didn't you do the Norseman this year?
Oh, Christ. Are you sitting down? Right, 90 seconds per question you gave me the brief on, didn't you? So, okay. I was fortunate enough to receive a lottery raffle place at the end of the Keltman last year for the Norseman. And that is one of the biggest bucket list races in triathlon out there. It is for me, it is for everybody in the space. And I was really, really, really excited to have received that place. I started getting planning straight away. But from June to September last year, I then went into prep for the double brutal extreme triathlon, which is a double Ironman distance triathlon. Videos on the screen for you just here. Look for this thumbnail. The training for that was unhealthy. It took me away from my social life. It took me away from Erin, my fiance. It took me away from the real excitement day to day, because everything became about how I was going to get my training sessions done. At points, I really struggled to get through the working week running both businesses, and getting to the start line was something I was immensely proud of. So I asked myself the question at the start line, have you done everything you could within the context that I had available to me? The answer was yes, but the post-event blues that came from that, I will admit, I've struggled with for a long period of time. It really took me until about March, April to become content with the thought of getting up in the morning excited about triathlon training again. And by that point, I'd sort of made the decision that with the cost implications, with the practical implications, with the fact that a sponsor that I previously worked with, I was no longer with, that was due to be funding the project, there was too much going into it for me to make it work from a practical point of view and also from a general mental well-being point of view. I want to go into that race feeling like I've given it my best shot at the best performance possible. I want to be excited about it from the get-go to the end, and I want to give it my all and not feel like I'm compromising on the businesses, which I'm also truly passionate about. And I also want to be able to see my friends, see my family, not be irritated and sleep deprived all the time. And this year means it probably just wasn't the right time. That was longer than 90 seconds before you come at me, I admit, and that was actually quite superficial. Hopefully that makes sense. I've been really skeptical about talking about this online because I don't want to make it seem like I've squandered the privilege of having access to racing the Norseman, but there are circumstances which mean I had to make the difficult decision that it wasn't the year for me, unfortunately. Hopefully I get the opportunity to do it again in the future, but I've made peace with the fact that the circumstances of this year meant it wasn't meant to be this year, but there's lots of things that I'm excited about as well. So I've been able to move on. If you want more detail, I was very, very detailed on this in about 9 minutes, not 90 seconds plus a little bit, in this episode of The Modern Mind. It will be linked in the description. It was episode this number, and the screenshot of it on the screen for you just now. That was much longer, I'm sorry. Don't hit me with a hard question. Cheers.
Was it a conscious decision to become a hybrid athlete, or was it something that you just kind of fell down the rabbit hole of?
It wasn't a conscious decision, no. Essentially, when Johnny and I met and I started training for 500,000 kilos of squatting in 24 hours, my strength base was up here. At the time, I'd recently squatted 260 in competition, and Johnny isolated my aerobic capacity being the missing piece of the puzzle to be able to sustain consistent reps at 60 kilos for that challenge, that event. So doing a lot more low intensity, steady state aerobic work whilst holding on to as much of my strength as possible. That's what Johnny really opened my eyes to 5 years ago, that allowed me to really build my aerobic base sensibly alongside the strength work. That has given me the opportunity to be so malleable to lots of different demands along the way. But the important thing to mention at this point, and this isn't the popular thing online, that I am very fortunate to have come from a very high sort of baseline of strength, which means that I've got a lot of wiggle room to work backwards to still be reasonably strong. That has given me a massive head start in terms of the sort of conventional understanding of a hybrid athlete, which means that building my aerobic base concurrently meant that I didn't need to focus as much on building strength as I did just holding on to it, which is an important thing to consider. Probably going to do a separate video on that, unless that specific question comes up later today. So the reason that we're filming a Q&A today is because the video that we had planned for Friday was put firmly in the bin as a result of me feeling very much in the bin waking up on Friday morning. So for context, my Whoop data is on the screen for you just here. I woke up with a 24% recovery score, which is actually probably better than I was expecting, after 4 hours and 4 minutes of sleep, and all of my health metrics were off. My breathing rate was high, my HRV was low, and I wasn't feeling all that sharp. So with that in mind, I made the decision early morning, after I woke up finding out my flight back from London had been cancelled, to then scramble to find an alternative solution, that the rest of Friday I was going to take a lot easier than was originally planned. We're in the office today on Saturday so that I can pick up the work that I didn't get to yesterday, as a result of giving myself the space to recover, sleep more last night, take more time to sort of just unwind and not place more stress on myself, because if you're taking one bad recovery score and then stacking more on top of it, you're going to be in a negative pattern. So I use Whoop to reinforce the information, use it as part of a bigger ecosystem of considerations on the things that I should do, the decisions I should make on managing my day-to-day to get the best out of my training, cognitive ability, and overall performance, and generally keep myself happy. So I've woken up today after 8 hours and a little bit of sleep with a 77% recovery score, feeling much better. So if you would like to give Whoop a go to better inform your own lifestyle decisions on a day-to-day basis and know when it's time to take your foot off the gas and when it's time to put your foot down, then you can get your first month free in the description down below. You also get 30 days to try it and see if it's for you or not, and then you can send it back without further obligation, and the Whoop 4.0 band is included within that. So what's not to love? Aside from the way that I was feeling on Friday morning, that I don't recommend.
Did you have any assumptions about strongman before you did it that were proven wrong?
I expected people to be less accommodating to me as an individual, given the death before cardio slogans that you often see on strongman and powerlifting t-shirts. And in fact, I was completely wrong. It was one of the most welcoming, most open events I've ever been to. Nobody had any issues at all with me having a camera there. In fact, a lot of other people were filming whether on their phones or professionally. And it meant I had a really fantastic day. Not that I had made the assumption that people weren't going to like me and paint strong men, strong women with the same brush, but because I was going into a new arena, I guess I just kind of assumed there were a few things that would have maybe had more of an impact than they would. I learned an awful lot from all the guys there. They were very accommodating in terms of helping me with the technique, the way to manage each stone at the London Games and things like that. Training for it, my assumption was I probably assumed I would be able to understand the biomechanical movement patterns of the movements more than I did when it actually came to picking up stones, picking up bags, all that stuff. Because, yeah, there were times I found myself playing around with things with the Stoltmans where I just didn't have any concept of how to get from A to B, where I thought I would be able to figure it out because I have a good understanding of my biomechanics. So having the advice of the people I've had throughout the prep and them all being so forthcoming was fantastic.
Do you come from an athletic family?
So my dad was a professional cricketer, so yes, I guess, but cricket, athletics, yeah, up for debate. He was a batsman as well, which meant you could just stand and deliver and not actually need to really move, but I think he was a reasonable fielder, or so he says. So there's something there, but if you look at my dad now, sorry, Steve, you wouldn't assume that there was athletic genetic potential there, and my mum was a recreational sports player up to university level, not beyond, but Jamie is also a professional cricketer and has been very competent at sport throughout his entire existence. I was very fortunate growing up in Scotland that if there was a sport I wanted to try, my parents would be very accommodating of that. Skateboarding, snowboarding, golf, cricket, football, rugby, obviously, anything that I wanted to try. I think the athletic curiosity that came from my parents translated into their children meant that we had the opportunity to be very athletic growing up, which I think in terms of skill acquisition and development has made Jamie and I better athletes now than we would have been were we a little bit more linear in what we approach from a sporting background. But yeah, I mean, long story short, yes, athletic background, but my dad wasn't powerlifting and running. He was playing cricket and drinking pints because that's what that game was in years gone by.
Are you married?
I am not. I've been engaged for... Careful. On the 12th of December in 2023, I will have been engaged for 2 years. We have made no plans towards a wedding because there are a lot of other priorities, like the Norseman conversation earlier. There's some really very exciting business commercial priorities this year that a lot of my focus has been in. And it means that when it comes to the process of planning a wedding, my stance has been, and Erin's very accommodating and understanding of this, is I don't want to in any way be stressed out by or resent the process of planning what should be the happiest day of my life. So until I have the mental energy to be able to do that, which probably isn't coming anytime soon, then we've both agreed that the financials of a wedding, the time allocated to planning the wedding is probably something for the future. But we're not wanting a big lavish ceremony. It's kind of just a case of where we're going to do it, when, who's going to be there, and what does the roadmap to planning that look like. So again, very much like the Norseman considerations, that there is so much exciting stuff happening this year. It means that difficult decisions around where I allocate my time, where we allocate financial resource, where we allocate staff resource, etc. We've had to be pretty clear cut on where that's going. And from a personal life point of view, we've been engaged for a while. We're still engaged. We will get married at some point in the future. The end.
What are 3 things you tell your younger self when you were suffering with poor mental health?
Number 1, you're not the only person that feels this way. That was a big immediate learning for me when I started to recover, in the sense that I didn't feel that expressing the way I felt would be understood by those around me, my male friends, male family members, acquaintances, university resources, whatever it was, because I the guilt of I have a roof over my head, I can afford food, I've got all of my limbs, all of the positive things that I had on paper, I felt like I would have been ridiculed for feeling the way that I did at the time, when in reality I was just another young man that wasn't living their life in the best way possible, given what gave them fulfillment, purpose, etc., etc. If that makes sense. Number two is I would have a less black and white view of the world and my place within it. So a big part of the reason that I had such a downturn in my mental health is because I'd mapped out the rest of my life, from the grades that I wanted to get, to the job that I wanted to get, to the house that I wanted to then get, the promotion, the holidays, all the traditional keeping up with the Joneses, American dream in Britain, I guess, weird, but this, the usual traditional notions of success stuff. And that meant that every decision that I made that wasn't in line with moving closer towards those goals meant that I was labeling myself as a failure day to day. So I never gave myself the room psychologically to relax, to do things for the sake of doing them. Everything had to have a purpose, and that made me very linear in my view of the world, which made life very black and white, when in fact life is very grey. So viewing success differently now, and much more flexibly, in terms of what do I enjoy doing and who do I enjoy doing it with, focus on that, means that it's much easier for me to go with the ebbs and flows of day-to-day existence without being so harsh on myself. Number three is vulnerability is a mark of strength, not weakness. You've seen me on this channel with all of the challenges I've taken on, the things I talk about. I actively seek out vulnerability because it exposes my weaknesses, it exposes where I can improve, and that's the only way for me to move forward as an individual, as a person, as a man. Whereas when I was younger, I was absolutely petrified at the thought of being made vulnerable because it would have exposed me in some way. Whereas I put on this facade of having my shit together at all times, always being in control, always being happy, always being moving in the right direction, when in reality, nobody is existing like that. So yeah, I think that's probably all that I need to say on that third point, so not to make this an entire video in and of itself, but you're not alone. I was not alone. Reconsider success. And what was the third one? What was the third thing I said? Vulnerability, thank you. And view vulnerability as a mark of strength, not weakness, because exposing yourself to vulnerability will give you the opportunity to improve, make progress forwards, which is ultimately what most of the people that are avoiding vulnerability in the first place are striving for in their day-to-day life. The most hyper-masculine men, or as they present themselves online at the moment, are anti-vulnerability, but they are ironically probably the ones that would benefit most from being vulnerable, because there is no better way to self-improve, develop yourself, than by exposing your weak points, as with everything else. You're not gonna know if a bridge is sturdy if you don't know where its weak points are. That is where I run out of engineering expertise. And that's not the best analogy, but please forgive me, as this is all off the cuff.
Any tips for increasing speed when long distance running?
Combination of intervals, tempo / sub-threshold work, and then low intensity steady state work. So do your zone 2 in zone 2, make sure to stick with that. Don't find yourself in the sort of junk zone in the middle where you're kind of not moving slow enough, but you're not moving fast enough to really elicit a sort of threshold response. So make your intervals quality and high intensity focused. Don't think that you need to be doing really high volume in those. Make your sub-threshold and threshold work as focused and specific to your zones as possible, and execute it well. And then you should, as you bring up your aerobic base from the low intensity steady state stuff in zone 2, the combination of the intervals and the sub-threshold and the tempo work should simultaneously bring up your top end speed, which alongside your aerobic capacity should translate to a more efficient zone 2 that you should be able to sustain over a longer period of time. If we're talking marathon specifics, for example, then there's going to be race pacing work, there's going to be getting used to repeating the movement pattern that comes with a certain pace in terms of the proprioception of it, the familiarity with that pacing, and that's probably a little bit more specific, but in general terms, without knowing the intricacies of what you're training for or what your training looks like or where you started versus where you are now, that probably covers it.
Can you make good progress only doing a few sessions a week compared to, say, 6 or 7 sessions a week?
Yes. I'd probably rather have a sort of definition of terms in terms of progress here, but can you move forwards? Yes, but as with everything here, especially within the realm of hybrid training, specificity is king, consistency is king, and setting specific targets to work towards alongside then doing the specific training for them is what's most important, especially if you're running on limited sort of allocation of training time. You need to make sure that the training that's being done is as effective and as targeted towards your specific goals as possible. Without knowing those specific goals, I can't give specific advice. Christ, say specific more, Fergus. Drink every time I say That's embarrassing. I've been drinking. This isn't water, my friends. Completely lost my train of thought, but basically, be specific with your goals, otherwise you will be treading water. Be specific with your training, otherwise you will be training for the sake of training, which is absolutely fine. But if you are trying to optimize the time that you have to allocate to training, make sure that what you are doing is as focused towards the goals that you have as possible. That's probably where I need to draw a line under that, because I don't know the reality of what you're training for or how you're training for it. But can athletes make progress in multiple disciplines with limited time and 4 sessions a week? Probably, within certain parameters. Are you going to win the Ironman World Championships and compete in your first powerlifting competition on 4 sessions a week? Probably not. But can you improve your 5K time and get reasonably stronger? Yes. So devil's in the detail here. Hopefully that kind of answers the nuance rather than the question itself.
Would you ever do a CrossFit competition?
There it is. Always gets asked. No, I like running 5Ks, not 4.5Ks, but the best way to PB your 5K is to only run 4.5. Will I do a CrossFit competition? Probably not. I have a huge amount of respect for CrossFit, athletes and the sport in general. I love watching it. I have a lot of friends that do it, but I like pursuing sports individually rather than blended. And that's just what gets me up in the morning excited. So unless that changes, I'll probably keep doing my thing. CrossFitters can keep doing their thing, and people on the internet can keep comparing two things that are not the same.
How sore were you after the strongman event?
I'm still sore, genuinely. It might be sleep deprivation because I've had a pretty wild 2 weeks, but what I really enjoyed about the strongman competition was because it reminded me nostalgically of my powerlifting days and that sort of weird nervous system, systemic slump that comes from big efforts under load. And I had 5 events at the strongman event. I was caffeinated up to my eyeballs, and then the following day, full work day, driving to Manchester, getting there at 1 in the morning to be up at 6 to then get to an event. And it was all a bit of a blur, but I have been pretty sore all over since then. But it was it wasn't as specific as DOMS, it wasn't as specific as I've run a long way, my type 1 muscle fibers and just hips and joints and everything are fatigued. It was more just this overload of "you're fucked, son" that I was feeling. And yeah, there were some bits that were sorer than others, and my forearms were battered, obviously, from very rough stones and all that stuff. My hands were swollen in terms of the specifics of it when you're handling big stones, but it was just a real systemic sort of punch all over that happened. It's horribly explained, but basically, yes, I was very sore. My forearms were physically from the outside very sore, as were my hands, but internally I was just pretty minced. Still am, to be honest.
What does your recovery look like, and do you do any stretching?
My recovery is not doing too much training in the first place, eating the right amount and making sure that I get adequate sleep, but I've not been that good at that recently, to be honest. Sleep is the one element that I need to get better at in my current circumstances, and until I've got that nailed, I will do no additional, the top grain of sand on the pyramid of sand stuff that the fitness industry likes to market to you, because you can't CBD oil or infrared mattress topper your way out of doing too much training in the first place. So nail the basics: programming, sleep, food, hydration, managing stress in your external day-to-day life. And I don't know many people that do that, to be honest. So all of the additional recovery buzzwords are not really something I spend too much time worrying about. Will I explore them in the future? Maybe. Am I going to get an ice bath soon and play around with that? Might I get an infrared sauna? Yes, but that's more just for the enjoyment of it and to explore whether it has any benefits. But right now I don't actually do any of the sort of in vogue stuff. Was there a second part? Oh, stretching. No, I don't do any stretching other than mobilization pre-lifting in the areas that I'm not that mobile, because you get a lot of mobility work through moving through a full range of motion under load against resistance, and there's a lot of research to support that. And I'm flexible enough, generally speaking, that I'm not going to snap my shit up doing basic movements.
Have you ever tried yoga?
I've done more yoga in the past 2 weeks than I've done in my whole life. So I've been at 2 events. I've been at the My Protein Rebound event, and then I was at the Whoop Wellness Week down in London, and there were yoga sessions in both. So in the past 2 weeks, I've done 2 yoga sessions, and they have come at a time where I have been physically battered from the Donaldini Games or some very hard efforts at the track. and it's helped loosen me up for the rest of the day, and I enjoyed the tranquility of it. However, I must admit, the intensity of my mind and the thoughts flying around my head and the desire to crack on with things, it's probably a me problem rather than a yoga problem. Before anyone gets offended, that's not how I'm intending to say this, but it felt a bit long for me. I felt like I kind of hit a point where I was done, and then there was 15 minutes more, but I enjoyed it, and it did loosen me up. But I feel like I could get as loose as I did in the yoga session much quicker through some more focused mobility work, and then have time to address the things that were flying around my head as I was doing the yoga. So actually, it sounds like I just have far too hyperactive a mind, and yoga would be very beneficial to me, and this has revealed that with this question. So thank you for asking it, Ed. We have some things to address after this. I need help. I need help. Next.
If you had to drop one and rebuild it from scratch, which would you choose, business or your fitness?
Ooh, interesting. Fitness, because I am fortunately in quite an adaptive position genetically, and probably through the fortunate upbringing I had in that I was exposed to lots of different sporting disciplines, and it's easier to be able to train for things and explore new sports and disciplines and gym settings and all that stuff when you can keep the lights on. So, yeah. And I love the self-exploration of trying new things and playing around with fitness. So to be able to do it all over again, although the caveat to that, would I have the knowledge I have now, or would I be back to baseline when I didn't have it? Because that would make it quite different, actually. Why am I creating nuance to the question? I'm a weird guy. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm waffling a bit here, but bottom line, I think I would rather rebuild fitness because the curiosity that I have for training in general feels more exciting entering this whole new world again.
Do you think you can be a hybrid athlete as a high school student?
Yes, very much so. Again, the phrase hybrid athlete, the internet is doing its best job of blurring so much it almost means nothing anymore, which is an entirely separate topic, and I'm already going down a rabbit hole, so I'll scale it back. But it depends on your goals. If you're saying you want to be an Ironman, then no, because the minimum age is 18. If you would like to compete at the World Powerlifting Championships, then that might be difficult alongside exams and being in the football team or whatever you end up doing. You might have mandatory things at school that you need to take on board. But what I will say is there is no better time to develop skills, acquire skills, and try different sports and play around with things because you have less responsibilities, which isn't an insult, but more it's a case of it's a great time in your life to be able to play around with what's available to you and leverage puberty to your advantage, because the skills that we develop when we're younger are carried with us well into later life. So again, it depends on what your definition of a hybrid athlete is, what you are training for and what you want that to look like for me to give a definitive answer. But are there combinations of strength training and other disciplines that do not inherently support strength training that you can progress in simultaneously? Yes, there are combinations of those things out there that you can do whilst at high school, I am sure of it. Unless you tell me that you have some wild social circumstances that mean that you can't. So I don't wanna make assumptions beyond what I've said, I guess.
How big is your team around you?
Ooh, good question. So, me, Johnny, Ed behind the camera, Elliot, editor, Jamie, who is full-time employee in events and community management and a coach with Omnia now as well. I have a virtual assistant. I have Erin, who manages sort of admin stuff day to day. We then have some subcontractors that work with us for Omnia as coaches. So 7 or 8? 7. The team is 7, but that is across everything. 8, because I also have a guy that looks after speaking inquiries for me. But that's not full time, that's part time. So yeah, 8 people across the Modern Mind, Omnia, my social media channels, and just generally keeping me functioning on a day-to-day basis.
What car do you drive, and do you have a dream car?
I have a Ford Ranger, which you'll have seen in videos in the past. Erin and I have a Tesla Model Y for day-to-day existence, and then I have a silly car for weekends. Oh, do I have a dream car as well? Yes, I do, an Aventador SVJ. That's that.
Would you ever consider getting into combat sports?
I'd consider it, yeah. I generally spend my day-to-day avoiding getting kicked in the head But if I was willingly to move towards it, I'm very confident that with Johnny's backing, given that his S&C experience and highly credible experience in the industry with MMA, boxing, BJJ, would put me in the best position possible to be able to make progress in it. But when am I going to be at a point in my life where I'm willingly going to be getting kicked and punched in the head? I'm not sure. Watch this space. But right now, all jokes aside, it's essentially something I'd love to explore at one point as a component of overall fitness, and just to understand the skill, the acquisition, the biomechanics, all that goes into it. But yeah, my priorities at the moment, again, everything comes back to what do I wake up excited about training for? And I'm in the fortunate position that I get to lean towards that. Sometimes I wrestle with myself and there's commercial considerations to bear in mind, and I have certain biases, of course, and things that I feel that are attached to my identity that I should be doing. We're kind of coming back to the Norseman discussion here again, where I go more into this specific detail in that podcast that I referred you to. But yeah, when I wake up in the morning thinking, oh, you know what, Fergus, you are lacking in the skill of scrapping. That's something that you should pursue. Are you excited to get in that environment and learn it? At some point in my life, I'm sure that curiosity will make me excited one morning. And from that point onwards, I will learn to fight better than I currently can, which is, you could probably kick my head in if you've done a couple of classes in any combat sport setting.
Out of all the training you do, what is currently your favourite session and why?
I have a love-hate relationship currently with the track sessions that I'm doing, because I feel a real sense of dread every day before I do them, which sounds like a bad thing, but that sense of dread, that nervous energy, is ultimately why I enjoy pushing myself so much. Because again, going back to the vulnerability discussion earlier, it's that feeling of, oh, I don't want to do this, this is intimidating, that means that when I get to the other side of that session and I willingly work through the suffering and the pain and the challenge of it, I can be very proud of myself, and those bricks will stack over time to make me a better person overall. I enjoy the simplicity of it as well, where 400 meters in 70 seconds for 8 reps with 90 seconds rest between efforts is pretty cut and dry. But during the session, I loathe them. And for a little while afterwards, I loathe them. So it's kind of a retrospective enjoyment and a acknowledgement of the value that comes with the dread of doing hard effort interval sessions with short rest at the track, as I'm currently training for a sub 5 mile and a deadlift of the 500 pounds variety.
Would you ever take external investment into your businesses?
Yes, at some point. We are completely sort of profit funded at this point, and have enjoyed the process of doing so for 2.5 years at this point, and everything's going well. Excitingly, we are about to embark on a rather significant change in many ways, which will, there's loads of really positive, exciting change coming, but I feel like the business is going through a really quite significant evolution that I am buzzing about, but is, proving challenging to keep moving forwards. And there's times where I think this would be a lot easier if we had a lot more cash to play with. I'd love some silver-haired experience. I'd love some guidance from people in the industry. There's people that I speak to, there's people that I have guidance from. I don't have an official mentor, as it were, but I like to extract as much information from people that have walk the walk and experience the things that I'm currently experiencing as much as possible. There is a version of Omnia that we see in the future where investment would be required. We're not yet there, so we will keep moving towards that point, and if it becomes viable, we will explore it as an option. For now, it's not necessary, whilst it may be helpful. All things considered, not for now, but probably for the future.
What music do you listen to?
Did you write this question? Ed's an absolute nose for music and trying to be that guy. It's like, oh yeah, I heard this track years ago, man. Like, if he had a beard, he'd make it his whole personality, put it that way. Right. You know what, I'll use your top songs from 2022, which is one of my most played playlists at the moment. And I'm gonna come right out and say it. Metallica, for every year, have been my most played artist for many, many years now. I love them. And second on the list is Machine Gun Kelly. Judge me if you would like. Maybe I've ruffled some feathers, maybe I've irked some people out there, but consider the feathers ruffled. 3 Days Grace, Bring Me the Horizon, Arctic Monkeys are in there for a couple of bits, Fall Out Boy. I'm basically a moody teenager that is asking their parents for a studded belt, it seems. As Papa Roach are also in there. Yep, okay, this is pretty one-dimensional, if I'm honest. So basically, what unfortunately I think is now referred to as classic rock, because I'm of an age where what I used to listen to when I was a teenager is no longer just punk rock or punk pop, or I don't know what Machine Gun Kelly is classed as these days. I know he just upsets people, and judge me if you will, but that's that.
Are there any countries you want to visit that you haven't been to?
I can't visit Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, that part of the world as much as I'd love to for the scenery because I am very severely allergic to peanuts and I think I would be dead sharpish if I arrived there. So that's that. Kind of the curiosity is very much suffocated from the word go. There's much more of Australia that I'd like to see. I've only really been to Brisbane and North, which is kind of what a lot of people from Australia would say is the worst bit, and then the rest of the worst bit, aside from the Whitsundays and all that stuff, that's stunning. But Cairns, Townsville, Brisbane are kind of the laughing stock of most Australians. I've been told that is not my opinion before any Northern Queensland people come for me. I'd love to see much more of America. I'd love to see parts of South America. There's nowhere that I sort of have on a bucket list anywhere thinking, I'm chucking darts at it, being like, oh, can't wait to go, can't wait to go. Nepal, like that really mountainous part of the world that just must be otherworldly in terms of scenery. But yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have been to a lot of places and experienced places in different ways. But yeah, traveling the world is not something that's high on my priority list right now. But yeah, maybe I should sit down and make a list because there's a whole wide world out there, and the culture, the food, the people, the scenery, all the things that go into. I'm kind of selling traveling as a concept here, which I probably don't need to do. There's enough out there. But yeah, I think from a personal point of view, it's something I should maybe give more thought to because there is a whole wide world out there that I've fortunately seen a bit of, but there's a lot more to box off. So I'll need to give it some further thought, I think is how I will summarize that garrulous ramble.
Where do you see Omnia and yourself in the next year?
Well, I am going to be as bold as to say I'd say the transition we're currently going through is going from an online coaching business to a brand. And there are several reasons for that will become clearer very soon. You might have figured out at this point in the video that there might be some merchandise coming soon. I wonder what's given that away. So we're working on that. There is a very, very, very significant change, investment, commitment that will be happening in theory on the 1st of September. There are structural changes happening, there are hires happening, there are focus points happening, there is travel happening, there are different elements to the business that are being implemented, there are new things occurring, and there are plans for 2024 onwards to do a lot more with our community all over the world that basically makes us really want to activate the people that are bought into what we do, beyond just training, programming, plans, coaching, all of the stuff that Omnia's bread and butter is now. So that's going to keep growing and I'm very excited to do that. The specifics of all of that I've kind of teased in some ways on some social media platforms, but we will be very thorough in our documentation of all these things as and when they happen. So make sure to stick around, hit the subscribe button, thank you. Hit like whilst you're down there. You probably should have commented by now. Sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat. Modern Mind is ticking over with the podcast and the public speaking side of things. I haven't been focusing as much on the agency side of the Modern Mind for the past 6 months or so because things have been so busy and the priorities have been on developing Omnia to the point that it is to be able to go and explore all of these things that I just vaguely and cryptically ran you through. But yeah, everything is going well. There's a lot of hard work and graft and thought and change and trial and error that's going into the background, which is ultimately why this year has not been the year for the Norseman, why I've been focusing on lifting heavy and running fast and all these things that go on. And it's kind of stuck in my head since I did that segment that I just want to give as much context to that as possible. So if you do have any specific questions on what the priorities have been, I will respond without very specific detail on a few things in the comments down below, because I'd love to give as much context to that discussion as I can. But bottom line is this way, I hope. How's that for a criminal spin around in his chair with his imaginary, in this case, cat? So that was 25 questions. I've been informed that I believe all of which are staying. There was some waffle in there that's probably not all that valuable, so there might be a few cuts as we go, I'm expecting, just so this isn't a 55-minute long video. But that is an overview of all of the questions that we were answered in general terms. There were some that we couldn't get to. We had like 120 across platforms, so apologies if I haven't got to you yet. Drop any additional questions or follow-ups you have in the comments down below, and I will do my best to get back to you in the near future. But that is that. Do all of the stuff that I had a coughing fit about earlier. Like, comment, subscribe, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you next time. And we have a lot of exciting things coming, as I've alluded to in the last question, I think it was. So actually, without coughing, please hit subscribe. Lots of stuff gonna happen very soon. Goodbye.